You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter @RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans. Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am the Jacob Valk, except no imitation. I've got to start with baseball. We're getting a lot of pre-lockout deals. Maybe there needs to be a work stoppage every year. I mean, think about it. If the CBA was set to expire next year, rather than in 48 or 72 hours, whatever it is, I don't want to say that none of these guys would be signed, but the market would be a lot slower to develop. I mean, that's the thing about baseball free agency. Every other sport, the first day of free agency is madness. You go absolutely insane trying to keep up with everything. I don't know how guys like Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, and Adrian Wojnarowski do it. Baseball doesn't have that. It's usually one big deal a day, maybe two, on rare occasions 3. You never get this. I mean, this is awesome. I love it. And I think it provides more interest in the sport. Think about it. It's November 30th, and baseball is dominating the headlines. This is football, basketball, and hockey season, and baseball is winning. This is something to look at going forward. Restructuring free agency so that we have these big deals come very quickly. The first of those big deals involved the Seattle Mariners. They signed the reigning and defending AL Cy Young Award winner Robbie Ray to a 5-year deal worth $115 million. That's $23 million a year. There is an opt-out after the 3rd season. There is a no-trade clause in the first 2 seasons. But I think the smart money is on Robbie Ray staying with the Mariners for a while. I mean, this is a really good move. The Mariners saw the Rangers get a lot better in signing Simeon and Gray. Obviously, Corey Seeger also, but Ray signed before Seeger. So you've got the Rangers getting a lot better. The Angels are going to get better. The Astros are still the Astros. The Mariners need to keep up with the Joneses. It doesn't get much better than signing the reigning and defending AL Cy Young Award winner. Someone who I didn't think should have won the Cy Young Award. I thought it should have went to Garrett Cole, but Ray still has it. I mean, he had a really good year, went 13-7 with a 2.84 ERA, led the majors in strikeouts with 248, led the American League in ERA. I mean, here's the thing. If Robbie Ray was on the Mariners last year, they're probably a playoff team. They probably knock the Yankees out. I think it's safe to say that Ray wins a few more games than a guy like Justice Sheffield or Tyler Anderson or someone like that. The Mariners' pitching really wasn't that good last year. They did the stupid Kendall Graveman trade that only upset the apple cart. All due respect to Chris Flexen, he had a good year, but if he's the best pitcher on your team, you're not making the playoffs. You put Robbie Ray in that rotation. Think about it. Ray, Flexen, Marco Gonzalez, Logan Gilbert, and Yusei Kikuchi. That's a really good rotation. That's a rotation that makes the playoffs. It's a rotation that may even be better than the Astros rotation right now. At the very least, there's a legitimate argument there. I mean, not for nothing, but if you get the reigning Cy Young winner to sign a deal that pays him $23 million per year, you're doing something right. This is an outstanding move by the Mariners. You want to tell me that Ray's a one-year wonder? I disagree with that. He's never come close to the Cy Young before, but he's been a good pitcher for a while. Last year, he took the leap from good to great. You don't pay a good pitcher $23 million. You pay a great pitcher $23 million. But I like Robbie Ray. I wouldn't have minded him on the Yankees. Would have made perfect sense. Get another lefty starter to pair with Montgomery. Think about it this way. Who would you rather have? Kevin Gausman for $22 million per year? Or Robbie Ray for $23 million per year? At the end of the day, the Blue Jays could have brought Ray back. They chose to save a little money by signing Gausman. Kevin Gausman is not better than Robbie Ray. There is no planet where Kevin Gausman is better than Robbie Ray. I mean, this is a really good job by the Mariners in taking advantage of the Blue Jays' stupidity. Okay, now on to the Texas Rangers doing their best impression of the Yankees. Although maybe it's a bad impression since the Yankees haven't done anything. After signing Marcus Semien, the Rangers made another huge splash in terms of adding an infielder. They signed Corey Seeger to a 10-year deal worth $32.5 million per year. So that's $325 million total. He is now tied with Giancarlo Stanton for the 6th richest deal in baseball history in terms of total value. It is impossible to dislike this move. It's a ton of money. And look, Seeger has an injury history. But when you have the opportunity to get a former World Series MVP, a former NLCS MVP, someone who has proven that he can perform in the playoffs, someone who can excite a fan base more than Semien and John Gray put together, you do it. This guy's 27 years old. You give him 10 years. You want to tell me it's risky? It is. There's no question. There is no question that Corey Seager is going to spend time on the injured list. There is no chance on this earth that he plays a full season or anywhere close to it. But this guy is one of the best players in baseball. Last year, this guy hit .306. He had 394 on base percentage. He had 16 home runs in 95 games. He's not Barry Bonds or anything in terms of his power, but man, I'll tell you, there are worse players to build a team around than Corey Seager. Yes, injury prone, but when healthy, watch him go. I mean, not for nothing, Mike Trout is injury prone. We don't think of him that way, but he does have an injury history. Aaron Judge has an injury history. It's very rare that you're going to find a guy who's incredibly dominant and doesn't spend a little time on the IL. I understand that Judge didn't this year, but we all know his track record. I mean, there are a lot worse players to build a team around than Corey Seager. I mean, think about this infield for a minute. Let's say Seager plays short and Semien plays second. You've got Nate Lowe at first, and either Nick Solak or Isaiah Kiner-Falefa at third. And I like Solak. I'm not giving up on him. I know he spent some time in the minors this year, but I like him. Former Yankee prospect. That is easily one of the best infields in baseball. And give the Rangers credit for being willing to spend the money to put that together. I mean, the Rangers just spent $500 million to bring in Corey Seager and Marcus Semien. How do you begrudge a team for doing that? If you have the money to do it, how do you not tip your cap to them and say good for you for doing whatever you can to make your team successful? I mean, I was skeptical of the Rangers yesterday. Today, look, you gotta realize something. They only won 60 games last year. They were the second worst team in the American League, ahead of only the Orioles. They were the third worst team in the majors. Only the Diamondbacks were worse than them in terms of National League teams. To say that these three players are gonna account for a 25 or 30 win swing, I can't see that. Firstly, John Gray is not that good. Secondly, I'm a little skeptical of Semien. Has he really flipped the switch from good to great? I understand what he did in 2019 and last year. I just want to see him do it again. And Seager, like I said, you know he's going to get hurt. Look, there's no question that the Texas Rangers will be better next year than they were last year. All right, they're making a concerted effort to not finish in last place. To actually make some noise, to give their fans something to be excited about. And good for them. It's impossible to begrudge a team for doing that. But the Rangers' pitching is still suspect. Their outfield is still suspect. To say that the Rangers are going to make the playoffs next year, I don't see it. I like this move for the Rangers, and I think the Rangers will make the playoffs sooner rather than later. I just don't think it's going to happen next year. I think what they've got to do is take a big step in the right direction, maybe hover around 500, keep adding talent, and then you can sneak into the playoffs. I mean, one thing that could happen in the new CBA is an expansion of the playoffs. We heard that rumor that 14 teams from each league could make the playoffs. That would open the door for a team like the Rangers. I'm not saying I agree with that. The top 7 teams in each league making the playoffs. To put that into perspective, in the National League, that means that the Reds and Phillies would have made the playoffs last year. The Reds finished 4 games over 500, and the Phillies finished 2 games over 500. It's okay to have a system where mediocrity, or maybe a step above mediocrity, if I'm being generous, isn't rewarded with a playoff berth. You want to tell me that it would have been more fair for the American League? Teams like the Blue Jays and Mariners would have gotten in? They both won 90 games? I get that. But there's also a counter to that. Maybe the Blue Jays could have won more games against the Red Sox and Yankees. There was an August series where the Mariners dropped 3 out of 4 against the Yankees. You can look at any April series you want and pick a few games there that they lost and say win those and you're in. Making the playoffs isn't supposed to be easy. Instead of lowering the barrier to make the playoffs, we should be pushing these teams to be better. The NHL has that issue. The NBA has that issue. The NFL really doesn't. Their playoff structure is okay. Although as it stands right now, the Washington football team is the 7th seed in the NFC. I don't think anyone's crazy about that. But I don't have too much of an issue with the NFL playoffs. The NHL playoffs I do. More than half the league makes it. The NBA, more than half the league makes it. Major League Baseball is fine the way it is. Alright, you don't need to change it. It's one of the few things that baseball actually has going for it, their playoff structure. It's good. It's very good. Doesn't need to be fixed. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Moving on now to the Tigers getting into the free agency fun. They signed Javier Baez to a 6-year deal worth $140 million. There is an opt-out after the 2nd year, and Baez will be able to block a trade to 10 teams each year. In terms of AAV, that's just over $23 million per year. And I don't mind this move. The Tigers were rumored to be interested in making a splash in free agency. I mean, they took a step in the right direction last year. They finished with their best winning percentage since 2016. Give A.J. Hinch credit. Now, granted, they weren't a particularly good team. They went 77-85. But when you look at the Tigers, I think you look at a team that is primed to take the next step. Let's put it this way. The Tigers will play 57 games against the Guardians, Royals, and Twins. And I'm impressed that I said Guardians instead of what they were previously known as. Guarantee you I slip up at least once. None of those teams are any good. So if you're the Tigers and you position yourself as a team that wins like 2/3 of those games, which I don't think is unreasonable. I mean, I think White Sox fans expect their team to do that. You've got a great chance of sneaking into the playoffs. Think about it this way. The AL West teams are going to cannibalize each other. The AL East teams could cannibalize each other. If the Tigers can pick on the weak teams in their division, maybe, just maybe, they can sneak into the playoffs. Now, one of the ways that they'd enable themselves to do that would be to add a shortstop. Nico Goodrum was dreadful last year. Zach Short was dreadful. Alan Trammell's not coming out of retirement. The Tigers really needed to add a shortstop. So give them credit for swooping in and signing Baez. I mean, it makes perfect sense for them. Think about this lineup for a second. And I'm not going in order. I'm going in positional order. At catcher, you've got Eric Haas. From first to third, you've got Jonathan Scope, Harold Castro, Baez, and Jeimer Candelario. From left to right in the outfield, you've got Robbie Grossman, Akil Baddoo, and Victor Reyes. That's a good lineup. That's a solid lineup. You've got power, you've got average, you've got speed. It's a very well-rounded lineup. Now, what the Tigers need to do is add pitching. The rotation's actually fine. It's not great, but it's not terrible. Casey Mize, Tarek Skubal, Willie Peralta, Spencer Turnbull, and Tyler Alexander. I'm okay with that. They need to add some depth. There's no question, but that's a rotation with upside. Every one of those guys I just mentioned is under 30 with the exception of Peralta. I mean, that's a rotation that you can get excited about if you're a Tigers fan. But you do need to add depth. You can never have too much pitching. Injuries happen all the time. And your bullpen is really suspect. You've got Greg Soto, Michael Fulmer, Kyle Funkhauser, Jose Cisnero, and Alex Lang. You've got to add another lefty reliever and add a couple quality middle relievers. There's an opening for the Tigers to be good next year. They took a step in the right direction last year. Now seize upon that momentum by addressing your weaknesses. You added a shortstop, which you needed to do. Your lineup is set. Now, focus on fleshing out the bullpen and adding depth in the rotation and your bench. Your bench could use an upgrade also, with the exception of backup catcher. Jake Rogers and Grayson Grenier are solid backups. Speaking of catchers, the Marlins traded for one. They acquired Jacob Stallings from the Pirates in exchange for Zach Thompson, Kyle Nicholas, and Connor Scott. And I gotta say, this is an even trade for both teams. It's hard for me to find any fault with this. Jacob Stallings is arguably the best fielding catcher in baseball. He won the Gold Glove last year. The advanced metrics love him. From what I've seen, I love him. Cannon for an arm. I mean, I've heard people say that Jacob Stallings isn't just the best defensive catcher in the majors. He's one of the best defensive players in the majors. You have any idea how rare it is to hear people say that about catchers? And I'll tell you, I'm a little higher on Stallings' offense than most. Since Stallings started getting regular playing time, he's never hit worse than 246. He's never had an on-base percentage worse than 325. I'll take that from my catcher, especially if he's playing great defense. I have no problem with that. I will put that guy out there every day and feel good about it. I mean, it's interesting. The theme of this offseason is these lesser teams making concerted efforts to get better. The Rangers did it, the Mariners did it, the Tigers did it, the Mets did it, and now the Marlins are doing it. What have I said about the Marlins for a while? They have pitching for days. I love their pitching. They just need to improve their lineup. Well, they're on their way to doing that. They just got better at catcher. First base is set. They have Jesus Aguilar. Second base is set. They have Jazz Chisholm. Shortstop is set. They have Miguel Rojas. Third base, I don't want to say is set. Brian Anderson seems to be flaming out a little bit. He's gotten worse every year he's been in the majors. So you can upgrade at third. That's okay. Nick Castellanos is still out there. He'd make a ton of sense. You want Joey Gallo? I'll give you Joey Gallo. Give me pitching. And the outfield is kind of set too. You've got Jesus Sanchez, Brian De La Cruz, and Avisael Garcia. I'm fine with that. That's not a bad lineup. You need to upgrade at third. There's no question. But Nick Castellanos would make sense. Great job by the Marlins in making a concerted effort to get better. As for the Pirates, they got some solid players. Zach Thompson's on the older side. He's 28. Got his first taste of big league ball last year. Wasn't bad. 3-7, which I don't like, but 3.24 ERA. Came out of the bullpen, started. Imposing figure on the mound. 6'7", 230 pounds. The guy missed his calling. He should have been a basketball player. He's got some talent. Connor Scott has a lot of the tools you look for in a future big leaguer. He's very strong. Needs to improve his eye, but he's very fast. He has a good arm. He's very raw, and it's possible that he can bust. He's very toolsy, and what I mean by that is he has a lot of potential. He just needs the right coaches to work with him. And Kyle Nicholas actually has some interesting bloodlines. He is the nephew of Todd Blackledge. In case you're wondering, if he went to Penn State, he did not. He went to Ball State. But he's a very hard thrower. I mean, what's one of the things you need to be a good quarterback? Arm strength. Kyle Nicholas has arm strength. He hits 100 miles an hour on his fastball with regularity. He has a good slider. He has a very high floor. He's either going to turn into a middle reliever, or if he can develop a third pitch like a changeup or a curveball, he could be a starter. So look, the Pirates got players with upside. Zach Thompson can either start or come out of the bullpen for the Pirates. It's very possible that Connor Scott is manning center field at PNC Park for a while. He has that talent. And Kyle Nicholas will either start or relieve for the Pirates going forward. The Pirates got two safe prospects in Thompson and Nicholas, and one with the highest ceiling but also the lowest floor in Scott. I don't mind that. This is a solid haul for Stallings. The Marlins didn't give up too much. Even trade. Good job by both teams. Moving on now to the Cubs, signing Yan Gomes to a 2-year deal worth $13 million. And there it is. The last domino of the catching free agency market. Means that if the Yankees are going to look to improve at catcher, it's going to be via a trade. I'll say this, Mitch Garver would make a ton of sense. He's been rumored to be on the trade block. But basically it comes down to this. What would you rather see? The Yankees sign a stopgap in Gomes, where they don't have to trade any prospects? Or would you rather the Yankees trade for Garver, who has a higher upside, who will be with the Yankees for the next 5 years or so, but you're probably going to have to give up a decent package of prospects? There's logic to both. I mean, what's funny is we've also heard the Yankees linked to Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. He can catch. He's done that in the past. So the Yankees just keep adding former Rangers. Corey Kluber, Joey Gallo, Kiner-Falefa. I wouldn't mind Kiner-Falefa. I don't know how he'd deal with catching full-time. I don't know how that would work from a defensive perspective, but I'd be willing to try it. But I digress. I'll get into the Yankees after I talk about Gomes. This is a good move for the Cubs. There have been rumors that they'd be willing to move on from Wilson Contreras for a while now. It's possible that they can just non-tender him. Or it's possible they can trade him. I heard a trade involving Contreras to the Yankees. This was from Jim Bowden of The Athletic. It was Gary Sanchez, Davy Garcia, and Yoendrys Gomez for Wilson Contreras. Talk about an overpay. No, I am not doing that trade. Firstly, I don't think Contreras is that much better than Sanchez. Neither one of them are good fielding catchers. Neither one of them hit for a high average. Wilson Contreras would make no sense for the Yankees. The thing is, though, is Wilson Contreras better than Yan Gomes? That's the question. See, here's the thing. There are some players who you just want to get rid of. You've tried it. It should have worked. 'd, and it just didn't, for whatever reason. Gary Sanchez is that guy. And you get the sense that Wilson Contreras is that guy. I mean, I know that the fan base has turned on Contreras a little bit. I mean, this guy was supposed to be the long-term starting catcher for the Cubs. The second coming of Gabby Hartnett. But the defense just never got where you wanted it to. And look, we live in an era where baseball fans are smarter than ever. They won't accept a good hitting catcher if he has a bad glove. I mean, Wilson Contreras is not a bad catcher. All right, there are worse catchers than him in the majors. I mean, usually you'd take a 20 home run catcher and live with the glove, but if the fans have turned on him and you've just reached the point where you've tried everything to get this guy to work out, you brought in a former catcher to be manager, and he's still not putting it all together, yeah, it's time to move on. So sign a stopgap in Gomes. A guy who you can put out there every day and he won't embarrass himself. Last year for the Nationals and Athletics, he had .252 with 14 home runs and 52 RBIs. He's always been a good fielding catcher, not great. I thought Gomes would have made a ton of sense for the Yankees, but you know what? Give the Cubs credit. At the end of the day, the Yankees and Cubs were in the same boat. They both really needed to upgrade at catcher. The Cubs jumped at the opportunity to. The Yankees haven't. I mean, let me tell you, it's tough to be a Yankees fan right now. Now it's time for me to go into the Yankees. You see all these huge deals being handed out in free agency, and the Yankees are sitting on the sidelines doing nothing. You know they've only signed one major league free agent? It's Joely Rodriguez. That's it. That is the only major league free agent that the Yankees have signed. They brought him back, they traded Tyler Wade to the Angels, and they released Clint Frazier and Rougned Odor. That's their offseason so far. And when you look around the majors and you see all these players signing big money deals, two of whom went to the Mets, just a half-hour car ride away, no traffic, Yankees fans are going to get upset about that. I mean, I'm furious about it. I mean, these are all players that the Yankees were linked to. They all would have made a ton of sense. They're signing elsewhere, and the Yankees are doing nothing. They're just twiddling their thumbs. That's upsetting. The thing is, though, and this is tricky, there's actually a little bit of logic behind it. There is going to be a new CBA. It is very possible that the Yankees are waiting for the new CBA to kick in to see what the luxury tax threshold is, to see what the penalties are going to be, to see how everything unfolds with that before they make their moves. There's logic there. Think about it this way. Let's say you're hanging out with a friend of yours, and the friend turns to you and says, "Do you want to play a game?" You say, "Sure." You expect him to explain the rules, right? Instead of doing that, he just jumps straight into the game and says, "Here you go, it's your turn." Well, wait a minute, you're flying blind. You don't know what's going on. I mean, I was at a barbecue a couple months ago, Someone there pulled out a board game. It was called Root. I had never heard of it. I mean, I needed it explained to me in very simplistic terms. It was very complicated. That guy could have very easily said, you know what? Just figure it out. Or just do things and I'll tell you whether it works or not. But no, in order to properly play the game, I had to know the rules. The reality is these teams are agreeing to these contracts. They don't know what the rules are going to be. They don't know what the luxury tax threshold's going to be. They don't know if there are going to be retroactive penalties. These teams are flying blind a little bit. So it's possible that the Yankees are saying, we want to wait. We want to wait and see what the new CBA says, and then we'll make our moves. The reality is, even though it looks pretty bleak now, and I understand that, believe me, I went on this show and killed the Yankees yesterday, all is not lost. It may seem that way because teams like the Mets and Rangers are getting the headlines, and the Yankees aren't. I mean, we've gotten nothing from them. There have been no reports saying that the Yankees are talking to Correa. They made an offer to Kershaw. They're in discussions with the Pirates for Brian Reynolds. None of that. It's been radio silence. And that's a problem. That's a problem when you have a tortured fan base. In essence, what you're doing is you're asking Yankees fans to just trust you blindly. You have given Yankees fans no reason to trust you. This is a team that hasn't won a World Series since 2009. This is an owner that has never won a pennant as the principal owner of the team. This is a GM that only has one World Series to his name without giving Bob Watson the lion's share of the credit. Yankees fans are right to be skeptical. It'd be one thing if they just won the pennant or had won the World Series, had made a lot of noise, but this is a team that was infuriating all year, incredibly streaky, clinched a playoff spot the last day of the season, and then got embarrassed by their arch rivals in the playoffs. Why would we trust you? Why would anyone try to sing Kumbaya and calm everyone down? It makes no sense. This is a Yankees team that really has a ton of holes. Now the thing is, it's not all doom and gloom. It's really not. What did I say before the offseason really kicked into high gear? That there are a million different ways that the Yankees can play this. The scenario that I laid out on the offseason preview was just one of a million different scenarios. Let's think about what the Yankees need. And bear in mind, they didn't make any hierarchical changes. So Joey Gallo isn't going anywhere. Luke Voit isn't a long-term fit. We know who Brian Cashman values and who he doesn't value. The Yankees need a catcher. Like I said, Mitch Garver would make a ton of sense. Would the Twins want a solid haul for him? The answer is yes, but it wouldn't be the moon and the stars. quite honestly, I don't see the Yankees making a move to bring in a first baseman. I don't see them trading for Matt Olson, and I don't see them bringing in Freddie Freeman. I don't see them bringing Rizzo back. I just don't think it's going to happen. Think about it. You've got three guys, DJ LeMahieu, Gleyber Torres, and Gio Urshela. You've got to find spots for him. We know that Torres can't play short, so let's put him at second. I don't see the Yankees with this regime moving on from Torres. They've moved on from him as a shortstop, and that's okay. But as a second baseman, I think they still have faith in him. And I believe in him too. So that moves Torres to second. Where's DJ LeMahieu playing? He can move over to first very easily. You put Gio Urshela at third, you're fine. You just need a shortstop. Enter Carlos Correa. See, here's the thing. There were a million shortstops out there. Semien, Baez, Seeger, Correa, Story, Simmons, Gregorius. Now that market has kind of fleshed itself out a little bit. There was an argument between people as to who the better shortstop was, Carlos Correa or Corey Seager. Well, the Yankees don't need to make that decision because Corey Seager is now a Ranger. So they only have one option, sign Carlos Correa. It's not impossible that they're going to sign Carlos Correa right after the lockout's lifted. Doesn't it strike you as odd that all the big free agents have signed except Correa? Doesn't that get you thinking? Is there a handshake deal in place? Is Correa already packing his bags for a certain team? Is that team waiting to line up other moves before it consummates the deal? These are real questions. And I don't want to come off like a Yankees apologist. Believe me, I'm disgusted with the state of this team. But I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I'll be fair. It's very possible that they have a Correa deal lined up. They're just waiting for other chips to fall. So then you've got an infield from first to third of DJ LeMahieu, Gleyber Torres, Carlos Correa, and Gio Urshela. No one will have any problems with that. The Yankees need a center fielder. Here's where it gets tricky, though. Are you willing to turn Aaron Hicks into a backup? We know that Brian Cashman loves Aaron Hicks. Alright, and I don't know why, because I hate Aaron Hicks. But, again, Cashman's the GM. So it's really his opinion that matters. He's not going to move on from Joey Gallo after half a season. There's no way. Gallo's playing left. And I don't think the Yankees trust him in center. I don't think the Yankees trust Judge in center long term. Do they trust Hicks in center long term? I think if you were to guarantee them that Aaron Hicks would stay healthy, they'd be comfortable penciling him in at center field. But even the biggest Aaron Hicks fan would agree with you that you need to prepare for the inevitability that he'll get hurt. I mean, there are some trade options out there. Like I said, Brian Reynolds, Cedric Mullins would be absolutely perfect. Although I don't see the Orioles trading him within the division. I mean, you want to talk about giving up the moon and the stars. Brian Reynolds would cost you the moon and the stars. This guy isn't even arbitration eligible yet. The Pirates don't need to trade him. The only way that they're trading him is if they get a Godfather offer. I'm not saying that the Pirates would get all these guys, but they'd all be in the mix. Anthony Volpe, Jason Dominguez, Oswald Peraza, Luis Heel, Clark Schmidt, Austin Wells. Those guys would all be in the mix. If you're going to trade for Brian Reynolds, you've got to be prepared to give up a king's ransom. If you're not willing to do that, and I don't begrudge anyone for not being willing to do that, because that's a big price to pay. Is Reynolds worth it? Yeah, probably. But Odubel Herrera is a free agent. He's not as good as Reynolds. There's no question. But he's not a bad player. Last year for the Phillies, he had .260 with 13 home runs and 51 RBIs. And I think you'd be able to sign him to a deal where if you need to have him on the bench, you wouldn't feel bad about it. I mean, what kind of deal is Herrera looking at? 1 year? $6 million at the most? You wouldn't feel bad about having that on the bench. I mean, I think Herrera makes sense. It's either sign Herrera or trade a king's ransom for Brian Reynolds. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm just saying you're not going to get Brian Reynolds for a song. And I know that there's a subset of Yankees fans that for some inexplicable reason is never willing to trade prospects. And then they get mad at the Yankees for not winning. Makes no sense. You gotta give to get. Brian Reynolds would be the kind of guy that you would give up a king's ransom for. I mean, if you're gonna trade any of those guys, you'd do it for Reynolds, and I don't think you'd feel bad about it. But let's pencil Herrera in. Just because it's easier for me to picture him in pinstripes than Brian Reynolds. That means you're rolling out a team of Garver, LeMahieu, Torres, Correa, Urshela, Gallo, Herrera, or Hicks, and Judge with Stanton as the DH. Great lineup. No question about it. What does the pitching look like? It's suspect. You've got Cole, you've got Montgomery, you've got Tyon, you've got Herman, and you've got Cortez. I'm sorry, that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence in me. That's not a World Series winning rotation. Okay, it's just not. That's a rotation that gets you into the playoffs, but you don't make a ton of noise when you get there. I mean, realistically, all you need is one more starter. Fortunately, there are a couple guys out there. Carlos Rodon and Clayton Kershaw. If the Yankees sign either one of those guys, I don't think anyone would be upset. You want to tell me it's risky to count on those guys? Yeah. Rodon and Kershaw have injury histories. But since the Yankees missed out on Max Scherzer, this is really the best that the Yankees can do. I mean, I wasn't in love with Gausman. Steven Matz, I don't think he's any better than Rodon and Kershaw. Robbie Ray would have made a ton of sense. Don't get me wrong. The Yankees could have done that deal very easily, and it would have made sense. But if the Yankees were gung-ho on waiting, c'est la vie. Anthony DeSclafani, I don't think he's any better than Rodon and Kershaw. Did the Yankees miss on a couple really good starters? Yes. Scherzer and Ray. But they can sign Rodon or Kershaw, preferably Kershaw, but you can sign both. I wouldn't be upset with that. And you're good. That's a World Series winning rotation. Cole, Montgomery, Kershaw, Taillon, Cortez. You want to tell me Domingo Germán slots in instead of Cortez? Fine. I mean, I'll do you one better. Add Rodon, and Germán and Cortez become depth. You can never have too much pitching. You know that injuries are going to happen. You know Taillon's going to get hurt. You know Kershaw's going to get hurt. You know Rodon may get hurt. I have no problem stocking up on pitching like that. None whatsoever. You want to tell me you only need one? Okay, fine. Let's say just Kershaw. I'm fine with that too. And again, I don't think any of this breaks the bank. I think Correa breaks the bank. Garver certainly doesn't. Herrera certainly doesn't. I don't think Kershaw gets a ton of money at this point. I don't think Rodon gets a ton of money. Maybe they get like Eduardo Rodriguez contracts. $15.5 million. That's not breaking the bank. Compared to what some of these other guys have gotten, those are bargains. Then you've got the bullpen. Chapman, Litke, Peralta, Rodriguez. Just wanted to knock the lefties out first. Loaisiga, probably Green, Clay Holmes, and let's say Michael King. Maybe they add a middle reliever, but I don't think they need to. You can find a guy, pluck him out of obscurity, give him a chance. I have no problem with that. Look, it's really not all doom and gloom right now. It's not great. It's really not. Alright, and every Yankees fan on earth has a right to be upset that this team hasn't done anything. But let me ask you something. Let's say the new CBA is ratified January 1st. On January 2nd, if the Yankees sign Correa, trade for Garver, sign Herrera, and sign Kershaw and or Rodon, and then Brian Cashman in a press conference says, we wanted to wait until the new CBA was finalized, I think you're feeling okay. I think you're feeling confident in the team. I think you feel like this is a team that can contend for a World Series. Maybe it's not as great as it could have been. It would look a lot better with Scherzer. It would look a lot better with Ray. But it's not all doom and gloom for the Yankees. They had a million different scenarios. Now, they have less, but they still have options. I think Garver's a necessity. Correa's absolutely a necessity. Herrera's probably a necessity. Unless you want to give up a king's ransom for Brian Reynolds, which I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to. And adding a starter's a necessity. But even then, if they're not in love with Kershaw or Rodon, maybe they make a play for a guy like Luis Castillo. Maybe they make a play for a guy like Frankie Montez. The Yankees have options. Not as many as they once had, but they're not in a terrible place. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be skeptical. This regime has given you no reason to have blind faith in them. I'm just saying there is still a path for the Yankees to put together a team that's capable of doing special things in October. Alright, now I'll give you some NFL Valk talk. Specifically on Monday Night Football, the Washington football team narrowly beat the Seattle Seahawks 17-15 in an absolutely terrible game. Just a very tough matchup to get into. You know you're seeing two mediocre teams going at it. I mean, we had some exciting moments. We had the Rasheem Green blocked extra point and him rumbling down the field for the safety. That tied the game at 9. That was really exciting. You never see that. But we just saw stall drive after stall drive after stall drive. There were really only 4 exciting moments the whole game. You had the blocked extra point that turned into a safety. You had the 55-yard catch by Tyler Lockett. You had the great Seahawks drive at the end of the game. Give them credit. They were down 17-9. With 2 minutes and 19 seconds left in the fourth quarter, they have to go 96 yards down the field. And they do it. Freddie Swain had the big touchdown catch. Then Kendall Fuller intercepted the 2-point conversion. But not for nothing, if you're waiting until the fourth quarter for exciting moments, you're in trouble. This was a really, really tough game to get into. Congrats to Washington. They're now the 7 seed. They've now won 3 straight. Taylor Heineke does seem to be putting it together a little bit. Not saying he's great, but he's certainly not terrible. There are worse quarterbacks than him in the NFL, let me tell you. I mean, we've seen Washington sneak into the playoffs before. They won the NFC East last year with a 7-9 record. Now this year, there's a real chance that they sneak into the 7 seed. They'd get creamed by the Packers. There's no question. But they'd be in the playoffs. You'd have to give Ron Rivera credit. You'd have to give Taylor Heineke credit. As for the Seahawks, make no mistake about it, they are done. Put a fork in them. They are dead to the world. You thought maybe, just maybe, when Russell Wilson came back, the Seahawks could rally around him and go on a big run. Instead, they've lost the 3 games that Wilson started in his return. They have only scored 28 points in those 3 games. They look lifeless. I've said this before, I'll say it again. We've heard rumors that Russell Wilson isn't the happiest guy in the world in Seattle. He wanted John Schneider to beef up the O-line a little bit more. Now look, cooler heads prevailed. Wilson stayed with the Seahawks. I don't think that's going to happen this time around. I think Wilson's going to be a lot more vocal in his displeasure. At the end of the day, there's no way that the Seahawks are going to get better anytime soon. They don't have their first rounder. It's 5th overall, and it's going to go to the Jets. The Jets have 4 and 5. Joe Douglas, you better get those picks right. You can really build a dynasty with those 2 picks. I mean, the future's incredibly bleak in Seattle. If I'm Wilson, I want out. If I'm Pete Carroll, I want out. The Notre Dame job just opened up. Would it stun you if Pete Carroll went to Notre Dame? How about Oklahoma? I mean, granted, he can just retire after this year. He's 70. No one would begrudge him. He has nothing left to accomplish. But he's got to leave after this year. This isn't his fault, what's happening. The thing is, though, Pete Carroll did something that is next to impossible to do. This guy was a failure as a head coach. Once upon a time. Failed with the Jets. Did not do a great job with the Patriots. He goes to USC, rebuilds his legacy, is probably going to get into the College Football Hall of Fame at some point, then goes back to the NFL, wins a Super Bowl, goes back the following year, narrowly loses to the Patriots. Thank you, Malcolm Butler. I say that sarcastically. He has nothing left to accomplish. If you're Carroll, you don't want your legacy to be any more damaged than it has to be. Alright, after you were fired by the Patriots, no NFL fan had any faith in you. You were just another one of those guys who was a successful assistant, but just couldn't cut it as a head coach. You go to USC, you turn them into a powerhouse. You go to the Seahawks, turn them into a powerhouse. You have nothing left to prove. Retire after this year. If you want to go to Oklahoma, okay. If you want to go to Notre Dame, okay. But you don't need to. You have nothing left to accomplish. But I could really see the Seahawks blowing things up next year, starting with Russell Wilson. Sorry, Seahawks fans, but that's the only way you're going to get better anytime soon. By making up some of the draft capital that you traded away for Jamal Adams. Best move Joe Douglas will ever make. I don't care if Zach Wilson turns into a superstar. His best move will always be trading Jamal Adams for 2 first-rounders. Unbelievable. Speaking of Notre Dame, that job is now available because Brian Kelly left Dame for LSU. This may be more stunning than Lincoln Riley leaving Oklahoma for USC. No one leaves Notre Dame voluntarily. It just doesn't happen. It's Notre Dame. I don't like Notre Dame, but I respect their history. I mean, the only way that people leave Notre Dame is if they're fired. No one voluntarily leaves Notre Dame to take another coaching job. In fact, I don't think anyone would leave Notre Dame to take an NFL job. It's Notre freaking Dame. The thing is, though, I don't begrudge Kelly for leaving. And I'm going to tell you why. Brian Kelly saved Notre Dame football. After Lou Holtz left, Notre Dame went into a really bad place. The Bob Davie era was a complete disaster. George O'Leary was a complete debacle. Ty Willingham did a terrible job. Charlie Weiss's first couple years was good, then he fell off a cliff. Kelly comes in and instantly turns the team around. Their worst season was 2016. They went 4-8. That was a terrible year. All right, there's no defending that. You know what his second worst year was at Notre Dame? 8-5. He had them in bowl games consistently. He had them winning bowl games. He had them nationally ranked all the time. They're in the CFP hunt. It's really not hyperbole to say that Brian Kelly saved Notre Dame football. You know how much money he made for his efforts? $2.7 million. Compared to what some of these other coaches are getting, that's peanuts. Now look, that's just base salary. He probably made more in incentives. I don't know what other things were in the deal to maybe raise his total compensation. I just know that his base salary was $2.7 million. You know what it is now? $9.5 million. He is now the third highest paid coach in the nation, behind only Lincoln Riley and Nick Saban. He's tied with Mel Tucker, for whatever it's worth. He is worth that. Now, I have no idea why Notre Dame wouldn't match it. I don't know if Kelly gave Notre Dame an opportunity to match it. Certainly, he's had messy exits before. I mean, you've got to think that the board would go to some of the boosters and say, hey, we've got to keep this guy. This guy's the best coach we've had since Lou Holtz. You've got to think Dame would have done anything they could to keep him, right? This guy's one of the best coaches in the nation. And give Kelly credit for going to the SEC. Lincoln Riley leaves before Oklahoma goes into the SEC. Kelly says, I'll go into the SEC and I'll make LSU what it was under Joe Burrow his last year. I don't begrudge Kelly for leaving. I'm stunned. Coaches don't leave Dame. They just don't. But I understand the decision. Brings up an interesting question. Who's Notre Dame going to get? I mean, make no mistake about it. There are NFL head coaches out there that would take that job in a second. I don't know which NFL head coaches are Catholic, but if Notre Dame calls up one of those coaches and says, we're offering you the moon and the stars, he's getting on a plane to South Bend. I mean, I've heard a rumor that Marcus Freeman is gonna take over Dame. Freeman is Notre Dame's defensive coordinator. All due respect to Freeman, I'm sure he's a smart guy. Sure he has a good reputation. This is Notre Dame, okay? You just got embarrassed by LSU. Alright, LSU hired away the best coach you've had since Lou Holtz. You've got to make a splash here. You've got to go out and find a big name who the student body can rally around, who the team can rally around, and say, you know what? We're better off with this guy than with Brian Kelly. Marcus Freeman is not that guy. I mean, Cliff Kingsbury was linked to Oklahoma. Would he go to Dame? It'd be a huge splash. Luke Fickell would get people excited. Lane Kiffin would get people excited. Jamie Chadwell would get people excited. Jamie Chadwell would get people excited. Hugh Freeze would make sense. Jeff Traylor, UTSA's head coach, would make a lot of sense. I don't see Dame elevating an assistant. I think they're going to look to make a splash. Maybe even Eric Bieniemy. That would make perfect sense. Until tomorrow, I'm Jacob Valk, and always remember, if you disagree with me, you're wrong.